everyone, welcome to Toy Brief. I'm Aileen.
I'm George.
I'm Matt.
Welcome, Still on the Couch.
Thank you.
Welcome to Still on the Couch.
But someone may not have seen the other episode.
That's right.
So if you watch the other episode.
Go watch episode 194
Yes.
of Toy Break at toybreak.com. But we're here at this Toy Brief to talk numbers. So we started a little conversation on Toy Break, but we didn't have time to put it in that episode. So let's talk. What did you want to say about?
We're talking about
numbers
production numbers of like handmade toys versus produced toys.
and the
kind of.
AP factor.
Right.
And
where that all
review
comes
copies and how does that fit in with numbers. So let's hear what you had to say about it first, because I did read something on your blog about this, I believe.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was very sweet. I think a lot of what we collect, and a lot of maybe not necessarily why we collect, but why we can justify paying what we pay a lot of times, is that there aren't very many of them. Because if there are, then they shouldn't cost what they do. I don't think. I'm not, obviously I don't make anything. So I have no concept of what, really costs to make. But I see things, I start to consider APs. There's seems to be a lot of those, whether it's 10 or 15. That doesn't sound like a lot, normally speaking, but if there's only 200 of something, that's a pretty good percentage. And are those APs part of that 200 of something, or 500, whatever it happens to be?
Right.
And some may say, as they did to me when I wrote a little bit about a piece earlier, that doesn't matter, that's petty, you shouldn't think about that kind of thing, that has nothing to do with it. But it does, I think. Otherwise, they're not limited edition. Or at least they're not being honest about it. It's how it comes across. Maybe they are factored into that 200 number. Maybe they're not. But if they're not, then it's not really 200. Plus, if there are, extra figures made for reviews, I don't know. I saw some people did comment that they got a figure for review, but they did have to return it. But again, was that piece then sold to someone else's new? That doesn't seem right either. So it's still right. Yeah. I mean, there's just question about that stuff that before I never really had reason to think about, and I guess I don't really have reason to think about it now either, but I do for some reason.
Well, it is a thing, and the fact is that there's no, I'm going to say industry, even though it's a small industry, but there's no industry standard as to how to handle your numbers and your production run, and if you're giving part of that run to the artist, and it's kind of up to each individual producer.
Yeah, I mean, how that's handled is
that
definitely up. A lot of the time, what will happen from a production standpoint is a piece will get made, and let's just use this. This is not the thing, but you make this piece, and you're going to sell it as a limited numbered piece. And a lot of times with numbered stuff,
Let's say there's 100.
Let's say there's 100. The only way, if you're going to tell someone that there's a numbered thing, you have to number it. Or what's the point of telling them there's a number?
Right.
So you're going to make 1 of 100, 2 of 100, 3 of 100, and so on, and there's 100 of those. Now, when you're making it from a production side, you're also going to need samples to send out, like you're saying, to press. Or you're going to need, depending on your deal with the artist, sometimes you might have to give the artist some of the run as what's called an AP, or an artist proof, which isn't technically any really artist proof thing.
It's just
That's
an
another
extra
conversation.
figure. Right.
It's just an extra one made out of the actual run. So you're not going to give them out of that 100, or there's no longer 100 to sell. So you have to make, let's say, 110 or 115. Those extra 15 over the top of the 100 are not numbered. They're usually marked with an AP out of 100, or they're just marked AP, or sample. Sometimes it's simply written as sample. And a lot of times when you're making a figure, when you're working with the factory, you're getting samples ahead of time. So there are other samples out there of that number, but those won't have the number on it. So it won't say of 100 or 1 of 100. So technically, the run that you're buying from the store is out of 100, and there are only 100 of the numbered things. So really, to get upset over the ones that are samples, you can't really get upset over it because it's not actually part of that series. Does that make sense? It's
it
not,
does. No, and that makes perfect sense. And I don't... I wouldn't say necessarily that I'm upset about it. What I question is just the transparency of it all. Because
would you want the store to say there's 120 and then there's only 100 for sale?
I think that if they're going to push the numbered aspect of it, then they should be honest about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with them saying 120 20 APs or whatever that happens to be.
Right.
It just seems shady, and most people don't care, obviously. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about it before, and probably never will again, but
I think I've heard a few people talk about it before.
I think it's just known, or maybe it's just an understood thing that there are going to be samples on top of the numbered ones, but they're not part of the numbered series, so they almost don't count. I mean, I understand how, from your perspective, it's like, well, wait a minute, it exists, it counts, like it's there, it's made, but it's like it's not really, it doesn't count in the line because it's not labeled out of the 100 or out of the whatever number, you know what I'm saying? So it's like it is made and it does exist as a figure, but because it doesn't have that label on it. Now, if you're making a thing and you're making 100 of them and you're not numbering them, they're not numbered, but you're just telling people there's 100, that's where it's like, okay, well then there's not 100, there's 120, and there's nothing to market as different than that sample. Yeah. So then how come you're saying there's only 100? That I can understand where you would be like, and I think that's why people do hand number the things when they say that there's a limited number. Yeah. That's just from a production side of it, but it kind of has to be made because sometimes you have to make that extra, like, you're making so few of a numbered thing that you might need to make that many just to make your number minimum from a factory perspective, because factories don't want to make 20 of something.
No, or even 100 of something.
And the other aspect of it was the cost. I don't know, if there are, say, those 100 that are going to be released in the numbered series, however you want to put it, but then there's those 15 APs plus however many samples are made that are actually the same production finished product as the other ones, but still samples if you want. When they're figuring out, who is paying for those? Is the cost of those extra, say 30 or 20 figures spread over those 100 that are being sold, so thereby raising the cost of those instead of spreading it over all of them, since they're giving those away?
I would imagine, yeah.
See, that seems screwed up too then, especially if they're not really talking about the other ones.
The more you make, the less each piece costs.
Yeah, but then if still even out of those more you're making, even less of them you're actually factoring in how much they cost because you're giving those away, you're not selling them. Maybe I'm
How do you sell them
wrong,
if you don't? Well,
because the APs they're just giving to the artist, say, and then the artist is selling them and getting presumably all the money for it instead of having to pay a cut. But those APs, those extra 20, that cost of those is, I'm assuming, getting factored in, the 100. Whereas if they weren't, if those were in the run, then the figure theoretically could be cheaper.
I think
because there'd be more of them to spread the cost over.
But, well, no, because then if you had, like, instead of giving the artist those 20, maybe you had to pay the artist then. Because sometimes what they'll do is instead of paying the artist, you're saying, hey, we'll give you a piece of the run. Yeah. So that you're paying the artist, then that payment has to be worked into the price. So either way, that money's getting worked into the price.
Okay. Well, also beyond that, most of the time when retailers, or not retailers, but when the people producing the toys, the manufacturers are setting the price, they look at here's how much it costs us to make each figure, and then they say, okay, it costs $10 to make each figure. This is how much we have to wholesale or retail it for. So actually, you're not being charged for those extra.
Unless then they're saying that those extra 30, whatever that cost was to make those extra 30, they charge more for those 100 to make up for it.
So then they say, oh, it didn't cost us $10 each, it cost us $10.50.
Right.
I personally have never seen that happen on a manufacturer's end.
Because you are good business people.
But maybe...
No, bad business people if we're not making the money.
Apparently, we're terrible business people.
No, and that makes sense. See, and this is the value of Toy Break and / Toy Briefs.
Value.
Yes. Well, because they're free.
Free. We try.
Yeah.
But also, in case people want to know more about... This was a good discussion, though, because we have
I learned.
collector,
I appreciate that.
manufacturer, but we're also collectors. I know I personally like to collect things regardless of number, whether I like it or not, but much like Steve.
And I have a lot of things that aren't numbered. I shouldn't say.
Sure you do.
No, I do. I'm just saying.
I'm going to come write a number on all of them.
When there's a number, you want a reason behind it.
Yeah.
Right. And
Some
I think
clarity
that's
as to where that number came
More
from, or
information.
what that number actually means, because
And
it doesn't really mean what
right.
it appears to mean.
And the problem, again, there is no standard for how to do that, so each person has to put that information out there. So that's an interesting thing.
Or-
Maybe a good question to ask people if you're interviewing.
The better way to look at it is to
Yeah,
just
I know.
buy what
somebody.
you think is cool.
Just saying.
What?
Buy what you like. Who cares what number it is?
Collect what you love and love what you collect.
Ding, 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 ding.
And on that note,
The more you know.
And on that note, don't forget to visit Matt's blog at toyopinionated.com
thank you.
to see more of what he's doing. You're also on Twitter
I am.
at...
Oh, MHISEY26. That's M Hisey 26
I'm
at
at
Twitter.
at Eileen Gaspar.
Sorry.
George Gaspar.
And don't forget to subscribe. Give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying. Join in the discussion in the comments or
Do you
add
care about numbers? Does that matter when you're buying a product or a toy or a piece of art?
or
Tell
on the
us
forum
down there
or on the
in
forum.
my pants.
Oh,
Toy in your pants.
and then donate.
Oh, and donate. Yeah,
Yeah.
donate.
I
Donating's
recommend
good.
that. Donating.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Matt.
You're welcome.
Bye.